Chapter 36. Thanks to the time dilation, I'd lost 3 hours in River City by the time I returned. The sun wasn't up yet, so I turned around to head south along the main road instead of following my original plan to head the shorter way back to the Halfling district. From there, the vague markings of undiscovered territory were my lone guides to my next destination. I walked in the shadows of structures lining the streets as I made my way toward the upper dock area on the west side of the harbor. The scent of fish dominated the air, and I suspected the industry thrived nearby. I took refuge in the lone, shabby hotel with a tavern on the first floor. The dim interior was like something out of a medieval town and staffed by sour-faced goblins. All smoky oil lamps and lanterns, none of those fancy crystal fixtures. I ordered a drink and, after sniffing at the cauldron of rancid stew bubbling on the fire, asked for some cheese and bread to take up to my room. The room was as shabby as the rest of the joint, but the long walk left my body yearning to crash onto the bed without bothering to peel back a threadbare blanket. I didn't care about the view of the harbor they said was available if I stuck my head out the window and craned toward the south. Eyelids drooping, I gobbled the food while standing to exercise the last of my energy, then flopped onto the bed. My only intention was to fortify myself for tomorrow's reconnaissance. The sun glared in my window after dawn, so I dragged myself out. I fetched a large cup of coffee to accompany me while I scoped out labyrinth wines. The Goblin District was almost as creepy in the daylight. Mist collected in the hollows, roiling with unseen shapes. I wrapped my jacket tighter about myself and sipped at the bitter coffee as I passed ramshackle cabins and shops I didn't particularly want to browse. Scrubby grass infringed on the crumbling sides of the road where there were no sidewalks to allow pedestrians safe travel. Garbage littering the lawns wasn't uncommon. I found myself longing for the Halfling district, my home district, where I crashed over a diner in a small room. Shut it. Keep your head in the game. Goblin Land was no place to be daydreaming, and the slinking shadows persisting in daylight was proof enough. I sensed danger at every corner, but I couldn't help but wonder why the goblin in charge of the garbage pickup/protection racket hadn't bothered to collect the trash polluting his own area. Maybe there was no money in shaking down a downtrodden shithole district. The weirdness lessened when I'd cleared the low streets and headed uphill in search of the winery. It hadn't seemed so far at night when I'd been exhausted, but I'd been walking downhill then. The pedestrians varied in race like anywhere else I'd seen in River City. In other words, I didn't stick out. Or not too much. If Labyrinth Wines had a vineyard somewhere nearby, it wasn't in the Goblin District proper. Its compound sat on a corner by the western wall, and beyond the gates I spotted a swanky manor house. Further back were barns that probably housed the big vats and bottling facilities. An abrupt image of goblins stomping on grapes with crusty feet in wooden tubs made my stomach churn, and I considered pouring out the remnants of my coffee. Was that racist? Maybe, but they were goblins, and I couldn't keep the thought from circling my mind. I loitered as if just enjoying the sun with my morning coffee, a tourist taking in the local sights. The guards stared at me through the window of the hut, but I just smiled and lifted my hand in casual acknowledgement. Their incessant glares eventually convinced me to stroll around the corner. I wasn't too far from the racetrack I'd seen my first day in-world, near the edge of the Gnome District. My map confirmed the fact, and I had to admit it was nice to get a grasp on the city's layout. The place was a big oval bisected by the river, basically, and that I could wrap my head around as I located the pretentious driveway from the night before. No wine tasting or buying direct from any cute little shops on the premises, or so I gathered from the lack of inviting signage. Also, the snarly guards at the gate likely discouraged visitors to the premises. I studied the stone walls crawling with ivy, the spiked iron filigree at the top. Easy enough to climb if I was careful. Movement at the house caught my eye, and I paused by the wall. A goblin strolled out onto a balcony sporting an ostentatious smoking jacket that flashed silky patterns in the weave under the burnishing sun. He smoked an oversized pipe of twisted wood as he surveyed his domain, and I went still so as not to be noticed. The aroma of cherry tobacco wafted on the breeze, reminding me of my grandfather. Behind him appeared a female of a race I didn't recall seeing on the character generation screen, nor anywhere else in River City. Her face and ears were shaped like an exotic cat's, and long white hair fell about her shoulders. A fluffy tail rounded out her soft appearance. Her oversized robe draped artfully open from slender shoulders, so her voluptuous ivory-toned body was apparent for passers-by to see. Not that I stared. Feline or not, this one could stop conversations on the street. The way she fawned over the goblin, stroking his head and pressing her body against him, she had to be a rental. No one could be that enthusiastic about that frog of a man with his sourpuss face. He stroked her tail as he cracked an indulgent smile. Just the inn I was looking for. I strolled the short distance to the main road to linger against a boulder under a gnarled tree, pretending to sip on the coffee I'd drained moments earlier. Just loitering and watching the people and wagons go by. Nothing to see here. For added distractions, the intersection was unexpectedly bustling for such a creepy district. When the feline woman appeared at the corner, she paused to finger through the money in her wallet, despite the gloom of the surrounding area, then dropped it back into her purse. Not a care in the world. Her gaze dismissed mine as she passed, but I was sure she'd seen me. Women like that clocked the men around them, whether for safety or as potential marks. She stepped out of her stiletto heels, hooking them over her fingers, then took off at a smart clip up the road. I expected her to pause to catch the tram at the loop, but she continued onward. I followed at a discreet distance. She tilted onto her toes despite the absence of high heels, just like a cat, and her tail matched the alluring tick-tock of her hips. Despite the furry tail, it wasn't a bad view to follow, the way her candy-pink dress hugged her ample curves. I trailed her out of the Goblin District and through the Gnome District to an upscale establishment sitting diagonally across from the racetrack. The sign advertised it as the Gentlemen's Club. I'd noticed it in passing when I had visited Pracha. A simple name but an exquisite woman. Feline or not, she appeared upscale to me, well-suited to the gilded sign and a bouncer with a silk bow tie and equally shining suit, even if he was an ogre. The bouncer maintained a professional detachment as he held the door for her. I brushed off my jacket and straightened my clothes. Fortunately, they weren't too rumpled from the previous night's adventure. He let me in, and I paid the cover charge just inside the door. Staff never acted like you didn't belong at a strip club, not so long as you paid your cover, tipped well, and behaved yourself. Chapter 37. The club was dim, with pixie lights arrayed along the stage and the bar, actual pixies providing the glow like on the sign I'd seen my first day. Some danced, but most leaned inside their fancy prisons doing the 50-yard stare. Some of the jars had coins or other small trinkets in the bottom. At least they got tipped for their work. A human woman swayed on stage to music that wouldn't have been out of place back home, streaming from my handheld. I glanced at her lingerie-clad form on my way to a seat midway between the stage and the bar, then ordered a drink from the busty waitress. The place was busier than I'd have expected so early in the day. Most were regular Joes. A pair of Goombas at the bar wore the room like their own personal atmosphere surrounding a planet. Quiet, set apart from the patrons. I kept an eye on them, and sure enough, when the feline woman appeared, she headed over to sit next to them. Her stilettos were back on her dainty feet, and she looked fresh and immaculate. New micro-dress, hair fluffed, makeup perfect. A hand grasping my arm drew my attention from the stripper from the stage. "You want a private dance?" "No, that's—" I reconsidered as I scanned the place. High-end. Money behind it for a gentleman's establishment. Even the pixies were hot. Well, for pixies. "Actually, yes, I'd love one." I swiped up my drink, then followed her swaying hips wrapped in hot pink lace to the back room. Seated on the vinyl banquette, I watched her gyrate closer until it was time to take her up on the unspoken offer in her painted eyes. The human woman towered over my halfling form, raising one leg to plant a sparkly heel next to one of my legs, but every guy's wet dream rapidly evaporated into near claustrophobia. I nudged her shoulder for some space. I fished $100 from my pocket and pinched the bills between two fingers. Her gaze snapped to the cash while I sipped the drink in my other hand. "I wonder if maybe you could tell me something." Her bosom jostled in what I presumed was an intentional display when she gave her rumbling chuckle in response. "You're not the only one." The stripper fished for the money, but I snatched it back from her rhinestone-encrusted frosted pink nails. She palmed one hip and twisted her lips into an alluring, sideways smile. "What do you want to know, sweetie? Who are the guys at the bar? The ones sitting with the cat girl?" "Well, you must be new here." She planted her shapely ass on the cocktail table, hands stretched behind her to show off the goods in case I decided to use my cash in the usual way. Her attention flicked to the money, then to the infinity tattoo on my wrist. It hesitated on the latter. Then her eyes flickered with resolve. "Am I so atrocious you'd see me killed?" My head craned back of its own volition. "Why would I want to waste the most beautiful creature I've ever seen?" The pole jockey twisted her head in speedy negation. "Shove the flattery, guy." She made a peace sign, then flipped her hand to point at her oversized eyes. "Look here and tell me you're going to keep it confidential." "No one will ever know." She considered me for another pregnant moment of silence, then sighed through her nostrils. "They're with the Antonelli family." I perked up. I'd met the Antonelli capo and his entourage during my first delivery in River City. They'd practically left me an open invitation to return for more work. "They own this place. They brought Kitty in from away." "Away?" "She's a non-native. I'd think that would be obvious enough, you get me?" "But this isn't the human district. It belongs to the goblins, right?" She raised one shoulder in a half shrug. "That's where it gets a little complicated. This right here, sure, human district these days. Antonelli Sr.'s been itching to take over the protection racket in the halfling district. A guy named Bowminster runs the racket right now. The Antonellis use Kitty to keep an eye on him, if you know what I mean." The human double-cocked one eyebrow. So the Kitty was meant to dig up the dirt. Pillow talk while she serviced the goblin chief. What Rossi called a pussy play in the outside world. Send in the hottie to siphon intel or set a guy up for a quiet whack of the violent nature. I nodded, then prodded, but she shook her head and reached out for the money. "No one gives me specifics. That's all I know. Now pay up. The guys don't like it when customers don't pay." "What's her name, the Kitty?" She smirked and rolled her eyes. "Galore. Kitty Galore." "You have got to be shitting me. Her name is really Kitty?" "No one gives their real name in this business, sunshine." She shrugged, then wiggled her fingers at the money again. As she tucked the bucks into her hand, I thanked her for her time. Then I pushed through hanging beads to go back out to the floor. My brain raced over what I'd witnessed as I crouched in the cart the night before. The human from the club who'd moved the money to Bowminster's place. Barnabas. The puzzle pieces of a conspiracy started notching together. If Antonelli wanted to muscle Bowminster out of the protection racket in the halfling district, could Barnabas be one of their guys? Was he counting Bowminster's take, then reporting back to his bosses? I sidled up to the Goombas, tipping them a respectful dip of my chin, then casting a smile of acknowledgement toward the feline hybrid. Once my empty glass was deposited on the bar, I slid into a stool, leaving one empty between us. The thick one with shining hair pulled back into a grease blanket leaned to peer around at me. "This is a private chat. Someone invite you to sit down?" "I'm here to offer my services." "Your services? We got our services covered, thanks. Now fuck off." He reached to one side, then produced the tiniest crossbow I'd ever seen. Tinier, more discreet than even the one the feds had waved at me. Typical idiot mobster muscle. He dumped it on the counter for all to see. The other guy wore a shiny suit and hair parted to one side, sans grease. "Hey, let's try to be cordial, huh? The halfling has an offer." He chuckled. Greasetop snarled. "Fucking level 7, what you think you're gonna do?" He shook his head as if in disbelief of my audacity. The hanky in his pocket sparkled a little with a dusting of glitter. Noted for later, just in case. It might have been body glitter. We were, after all, in a strip club. But his eyes darted, his pupils dilated. Maybe he was just the anxious type. His cohort shook his finger my way. "Wait a sec. Weren't you at the fights last night? Over at Radioactive?" I decided to take a knowing smile out for a ride. He matched it. "Hey, this is that guy I told you about. You should have seen him. Like a real fighter, not that street corner shit." I analyzed the smarter one. Johnny A. He was a cap regime, which would put him fourth in a real-world organization's hierarchy, and that meant he ran a crew. I nodded toward the feline woman. She pressed her lips together in a tight line and looked away. I recalled how she'd clocked me outside Bowminster's. To mention anything too directly might get the stripper who'd tipped me off hurt, or worse. So I drummed my fingers on the bar as I formulated a measured approach. This is for Tansy, for your gang. Don't fuck it up. I saw the lady on Bowminster's balcony as I was walking by a while ago. Now I see her here with you. Greaseball shuffled on his stool, then jerked toward me, but his friend snatched his shoulder and gave it a tug. I showed him the lines of my palms. Hey, I'm not here to disrespect anyone, just the opposite. I ran a delivery for the Antonellis. I set aside the fact I'd been a female halfling when I did it, hoping it wouldn't come back to bite me. I'm just showing you I'm not some idiot off the street. I saw the lady there, then here. I'm guessing what it means. You've got a beef with Lyle the Goblin, yeah? I have the solution. I'm all about solutions. If she can get me inside, I'll remove the problem for you. Greaseball, whose real name was Freddy the Knife, so original, sneered. But his friend slid off his stool, then onto the one I'd left as a spacer so we sat inches apart. He tugged his lapels to straighten them. And what would you want in return for this very valuable service? He flipped 2 fingers toward a bartender with no top when she entered through a door leading into the kitchen, then ordered a drink. How about 500? Quest update. A gang of your own. Johnny Antonelli has offered you $500 to take out Lyle Bowminster. If you accept this offer, it will be added to your quest rewards. Objective 1. Take out Goblin Chief Lyle Bowminster. Objective 2. Form a gang. New objective. Take out the Goblin Chief Lyle Bowminster, then report to Johnny Antonelli for your reward of $500 and an extra $500 XP. Nice way to double dip. 1 bird, 1 stone, 2 payouts. But another thought occurred to me in real time. It would be a great time to test the flexibility of the game system. I'd like to amend the deal. Johnny smirked, shaking his head. You got fucking nerve. I like that. You want 1,000? No skin off my ass. What do you want? The quest updated with the new terms, but I sent the bubble away with a thought. No, 500 is fine. But I know Bowminster collects protection from my district, and taking him out means you step in, yeah? Johnny's face remained stony. I didn't give him time to think. All I'm asking is this. Keep your new racket away from the Bluebell Cafe, as in, forever. Make like they're on the friends and family plan. Maybe I was pushing my luck, but this was a wash if I didn't protect the Bluebells. They both laughed, though I suspected Freddy didn't know what Johnny was laughing about. The expression immediately before and after the display of humor was shocked, taken aback at the least. Bluebell, that's the one who fought before you, right? The girl you were hanging out with at Radioactive? I shrugged. Her pops took me in when I had nowhere to go. He swatted my back. Yeah, I guess it doesn't hurt that she's a real looker for a halfling. He leaned around to look at Kitty, whose gaze was still distant. See, Knife? The kid's got loyalty. I respect that. He shoved his hand toward me, and a contract appeared. It's a deal, kid. I scanned the document. The quest updated with the new terms. If I took out Bowminster, the Antonelli family would never collect from the Bluebells, but would continue to provide the place protection, since the Halfling district would fall under their purview. If they broke the contract and collected from the Bluebell family, they would incur a penalty of $5 million paid directly to me. I'd share if it came to that, and one never knew when it came to goons. I shook his hand, and our signatures appeared on the bottom of the document. Just one last thing, the capo said, hand on my sleeve. Yeah? Make his demise public, very public. We want everyone to see him with his dick in the wind. I smirked. Sometimes I can be so literal. Done. But can I ask one more question? He shook his lapels again. Shoot. Say I take Bowminster out. What will you do about the orcs? We'll hire the orcs. Those brutes don't care who they work for, just so they get paid. But they don't turn on their employers, or they get a bad rep. You take out the head, try to minimize casualties on the orcs, and we can worry about the rest. He eyed me up and down. Not that I'm too worried about you killing those brutes. Sure, you can fight, but don't trifle lightly. Capisci? Johnny raised his drink, and I clinked the glass the bartender had filled without my notice against his.